Yeah, so just comment a little bit further, if you would, on Matthew 19. You bring that up, and sometimes we hear people say, Jesus never talked about same-sex relationships, and there's this idea of progress, and we are, we experience same-sex marriage in a way that's very different from anything that would have occurred in the ancient world or that Jesus would have commented on, and so. Does Jesus say anything about that or not? And what's going on in Matthew 19 in your opinion?
Right. No, that's a great question. And there's actually three things that I'll try to quickly address. First of all, Jesus never directly mentioned same-sex relationships. But again, let's go back to kind of the inner Jewish dialogue. That wasn't even, there's not a single person in all of Judaism, 500 years on each side of Jesus, that ever acknowledged that was, or ever like that was considered a sin by anybody in the world of Judaism. And Jesus really only debated Jews on things that were debated within Judaism. I mean, he never brought up a point that everybody agreed on. He was always pushing back on various beliefs that they didn't agree with.
So you think he might have just assumed the consensus that was already settled there?
And I'm wary of making analogies, but there's several different sexual practices that Jesus doesn't mention. Just because he doesn't mention it to other Jewish leaders doesn't mean he didn't believe in it. Quite the opposite. It's like everybody so believed in it that he didn't need to bring it up. But again, going back to this idea of marriage, the main question in the same-sex sexuality debates within Christianity, the main question isn't, can two people the same sex get married? The main question is, what is marriage? How do we define marriage? And this is where we do see Jesus in Matthew 19, where he, in 19 verses 3-5, when he quotes from Genesis 1:27, and then he kind of splices it with Genesis 2:24, the big marriage passage. And he says, I don't know if I can quote it from memory, but he says something like, have you not read from the beginning that God created the male and female for this reason? And that's Genesis 1:27. And then he says, for this reason, then he quotes 2:24. Man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. The two there is the male and female of the previous verse. And that's not, that may sound like a bold claim in 2021, but that was, he's basically tapping into something that was assumed in Judaism to make a point. In that context, he's making a point about divorce. Okay, so but he's relying on the widespread Jewish assumption that marriage is between one man and one woman. So yes, it's true. Jesus doesn't directly mention same-sex relationships. We wouldn't expect him to, but he does clearly affirm the Genesis 1 and 2 paradigm of marriage. In terms of adult consensual same-sex marriage existing in that world, that's there used to be it is kind of an older argument within academic circles. Like back in the 80s and 90s, there was lots of books written that looked at the Greco-Roman world, and they saw all these oppressive and exploitative male same-sex relationships. And certainly those were widespread. Older men having sex with teenage boys, older men violating their male slaves. I mean, there was a lot of really oppressive male same-sex relationships. But as more and more scholars have looked into the literature, you do see a wide array of different kinds of same-sex relationships, from adult consensual to oppressive to abusive and so on. So it wasn't like it wasn't like there was no category of adult consensual relationships. And actually, when it comes to same-sex relationships among women, the opposite is true. Almost every example we have in the literature of a female same-sex relationship was between people of the same social status. It was consensual. In fact, there's even a funeral relief commemorating the death of two women, and they're carved out. It's a stone carving of these two women, and they're holding hands in the Roman gesture that symbolized marriage. And so they had some kind of marriage-like relationship. And based on the carving, these were two same-status women from around the time of Christ. So yeah, I think it would be, and most scholars today would recognize this, that it would be historically just inaccurate to say that the biblical writers had no category of, two adults in a consensual same-sex relationship. And certainly when you look at Romans 1 and 1 Corinthians and other passages, there's nothing in the biblical text that would suggest that the biblical writers were only thinking of like exploitative same-sex relationships.